Well out in the Atlantic Ocean, farther west even of the Western Isles, stands the lonely island of Saint Kilda, or Herta, as it used to be called, Gaelic for West Land, or West Country. Its rocky sides are inaccessible, except at one landing place, at a bay on the southeast, and lying out of the ordinary track of boats it is seldom visited. For nearly 300 years, no one except the steward of Macleod, the family that had been the possessors of Saint Kilda for hundreds of years, who made an annual pilgrimage to collect the rent, ever came near the place. At the end of the 17th century, when Roderick, the subject of this story, lived, there were 3 chapels on the island. One was called Christ's Chapel, and it contained one of their chief treasures, a brass crucifix, which lay upon an altar therein. They paid no adoration or worship to this, but it was their most precious possession. Of the 3 chapels, one only seems to have been used, and this, not being large enough to accommodate the islanders, the whole of the inhabitants would assemble, on every Sunday morning, in the churchyard, and there devoutly say the Lord's Prayer, the Creed, and the 10 Commandments. This form of worship was simple enough, but it seems to have been of recent introduction when, somehow or other, there was a man upon the island who passed for a Roman Catholic priest. But he was so ignorant that he did not know the Lord's Prayer, the Creed, or the Decalogue correctly. Consequently, he taught the poor people an incorrect version. But to him they owed the crucifix, and the observance of the holy days. This Eden, however, was doomed to have its serpent, and these simple folk were fated to be led into error by a man known only as Roderick. Naturally he was illiterate, for the means of culture were altogether lacking in that lonely isle. But he was above his fellows, inasmuch as he was a poet. Moreover, he claimed to have the gift of second sight, a pretension which would naturally cause him to be looked up to by these Gaelic islanders. These qualifications which Roderick claimed naturally pointed to his becoming a leader of some sort, and he seems to have entered upon his vocation early in life, for when we first hear of him in his public capacity, he was but 18 years of age. The islands strictly kept the Sabbath, and Roderick seems to have been the first to break through their customs by going fishing on that day. As, according to all moral ethics, something dreadful will surely overtake the Sabbath breaker, it is comforting to know that Roderick formed no exception to the rule. One Sunday he committed the heinous sin of fishing. He declared that, as he was coming home, a man, dressed in a cloak and hat, suddenly appeared in the road before him. Needless to say, this apparition frightened him, and he fell upon his face before the supernatural being. The man desired him not to be afraid, for he was John the Baptist, who had come from heaven with a divine commission to instruct Roderick in religious matters, which instruction he was to impart to his neighbors for their spiritual welfare. Roderick diffidently objected to thus being made a medium, and alleged his incapacity to receive such revelations, but the saint cheered him, and bade him be of good courage, declaring that he would immediately make him fit for his predestined purpose, and gave him the following instructions. It was to be of primary importance, and as a visible sign of their belief, that his followers should observe Friday as a strict fast, so strict that not a particle of food of any description must pass their lips on that day, nor might they even indulge in a pinch of snuff. A sheep was to be sacrificed annually on the threshold of each house by every family, and this was to be done in a specially cruel manner, for no knife was to touch it, but its throat was to be hacked with the crooked spades they used in husbandry, whose edges were about half an inch thick. This new divine revelation must thoroughly supersede and root out the old superstitions. So he forbade the use of the favored prayers and substituted forms of his own. His prayers are described as rhapsodical productions, in which, in spite of the abolition of the old form of worship, he introduced the name of God, together with words unintelligible either to himself or his hearers. He declared to have this received direct from the Baptist, and delivered to his hearers, as in duty bound. He kept up his connection with St. John, and used to assert that every night, when the people were assembled, he heard a voice, saying, "Come you out," and then he lost all control over himself, and was constrained to go. Then would the Baptist meet him, and instruct him in what he was to say to the people. The women flocked to him, and he took them under his protection. To them he revealed that, if they followed him faithfully, eternal bliss should be their portion, and that they should go to heaven in glorious state, riding upon milk-white steeds. Yet, as with many another, a woman was the primary cause of his downfall. It was his behavior to a woman that first opened the eyes of his deluded followers, and showed them that their idol was fallible. The wife of Macleod's representative found favor in his sight, but, being a virtuous woman, she told her husband of the prophet's wicked advances. These two laid a little trap, into which the unsuspecting, but naughty, Roderick walked. It was very simple. The husband hid himself until he judged proper to appear, confronted the guilty man, spoke burning words of reproof to him. He brought him very low, made him beg his pardon, and promise he would never so sin again. But although a hollow peace was patched up between them, yet the story leaked out. The prophet's father plainly and openly told him he was a deceiver, and would come to a bad end. The thinking portion of the community began to have serious doubts of the divine origin of his mission. His authority over them gradually grew laxer and laxer. When the steward paid his annual visit in 1697, they denounced Roderick as an impostor, and expressed contrition for their own backslidings. The chaplain who accompanied the steward, and who was sent over by Macleod purposely to look into this matter, made the prophet publicly proclaim himself an impostor. The steward, whose word was absolute law to these poor people, took him away, never to return. The poor credulous dupes, on being reproved for so easily complying to this impostor, with one voice answered that what they did was unaccountable. Of his ultimate fate nothing is known, the last record of him being that, after having been taken to Harris, he was brought before Macleod to be judged, who, being informed of this fellow's impostures, did forbid him from that time forward to preach any more on pain of death.